The Northwest Aerospace Alliance is a regional trade association which is designed to deliver and develop capability within the Northwest Aerospace sector. The Aerospace Supply Chain Excellence 2 programme, ASCE 2, is a supply chain development programme focused on improving the capability of the Northwest Aerospace sector. It builds on the successful foundations laid by the ASCE 1 programme, and it is supported by £7 million of public sector funding from the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills and the European Regional Development Fund. Collectively, the ASCE 1 and ASCE 2 programmes have invested over £20 million worth of funding in the Northwest Aerospace supply chain. The ASCE journey started as far back as 2004 when the Northwest Aerospace Alliance developed a series of supply chain workshops, working with the primes in the Northwest, BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce and Airbus. Out of those supply chain workshops was developed the ASCE 1 programme, which was an £8.4 million programme aimed at improving individual supply performance within the Northwest Aerospace sector. During that programme, it was recognised that world-class capability consisted of deep collaboration, and out of that came the thinking to develop a new programme, ASCE 2, focused around 5 key work streams. Central to these were commodity groups, which provided the demand signals for the skills requirements, an understanding of the requirements and the opportunities around shared services. It drove innovation through sharing best practice and developing joint research projects, and it worked with companies to try and develop the foundations and framework for collaborative bidding through the extended enterprise concept. There were 7 commodity groups identified. These were mapped against the core strengths of the Northwest Aerospace sector. These commodity groups were composites, complex machining, process treatments, robotics, automation and tooling, design and engineering, SME machining and autonomous systems. These were also key requirements for both current and future aircraft and engine programmes. The overall objective of ASCE 2 was to try and drive collaboration not just across the supply chain, but also the associated stakeholders involved in aerospace activity. This heavily integrated academia, universities, research centres to be working closely with the supply chain companies and also other key stakeholders around other key aerospace aspects. Over the 4.5-year duration of the ASCE 2 programme, the programme has managed to create or safeguard over 500 jobs, which has exceeded contractual targets.
The Learning to World Class programme was developed via the commodity groups which had been in place since 2010. The uniqueness of this process was the fact that each of the participating members actually helped create and word each of the key foundation processes that actually created the final models. Once the Learning to World Class process had been completed from a model point of view, this is the list of companies that initially indicated their specific interests to begin the process, which led up to a first self-assessment. Based on the lessons learned from the ASCE 1 Learning to World Class programme, we chose to create what we called a phase 1 to 8-step process, and we created a self-assessment guide that would enable companies to actually go through this process. This 8-step plan started with one of the most important features, which was to obtain the buy-in from the senior management of each of the companies. And another lesson learned from ASCE 1, ASCE 2 chose to contract in a number of mentors which would provide regular input and guidance to each of these companies. The self-assessment process, and this is a typical example of a machining self-assessment document, was based on a number of key foundation processes. And once the companies had done an internal self-assessment with the support of the mentor and the improvement expert, ended up what we called, in common language, a line in the sand. And once a company has achieved this, their next step in the process was then to take their findings from their first self-assessment and target what they believed they could achieve over the next 6 to 9 months, given the resources they had, plus the support of a mentor and improvement expert. This would then lead them to develop their improvement plans. We provided a generic set of common documents based on an improvement plan, which contained a tip, its graph of self-assessment, current KPIs around SQCDP, and a 4-box model. It focused on a project charter to illustrate commitment and ownership and transfer of responsibility, backed up by project plans to give the timeline of when the targets were to be achieved. We then introduced something called a process confirmation, which would be carried out by a prime from either Airbus, BAE Systems or Rolls-Royce, and accompanied by NWAA, to then do a go-look-see with that company who's recently done its self-assessment to assess its charters and plans and to see whether in fact their positioning was as reasonably accurate as could be defined. At each of the steering group reviews, you can clearly see we had a red, amber, green status. Those companies that achieved green were given the nod to go ahead and carry on. Those that were in amber, we visited to make sure that there was no misinterpretation of what we communicated both ways. And if it was red, again, to make sure there was no misinterpretation, but to request a recovery plan. This chart shows the companies that went through the full SGR3 process and remain with 16 companies. So from a company perspective and from a trade organisation, we could now demonstrate where machining companies had done their initial self-assessments, their second self-assessment, their third self-assessment, and finally, at the last steering group review in July this year, what their expectation would be going forward after this programme closes. So we had then the results from self-assessment on treatments, and we had the self-assessment results for composites. At the end of every steering group review, each company would receive a written feedback form from the input from all the people who attended the steering group reviews, and NWAA could identify then, on average, from SGR1 to SGR3, how performance levels in safety, quality, cost, delivery and people had been achieved. Clearly, at this point in time of the programme, which finishes in July 2014, there will be no doubt whatsoever that the journey each company has taken on this improvement plan has begun to deliver. And look at the benefits that these companies have now enjoyed through their engagement with the ASCE 2 Learner to World Class programme. It clearly shows that if the programme could have achieved an extension, how much more could we have actually done to improve the supply chain in the Northwest.